My name is Linda Caraway, and I'm 67. I've never been the type to raise my voice even when life demanded it. I've always measured my words carefully, carried myself with quiet patience, and believed that kindness was a currency worth investing in. But patience, I was learning, has its limits. I was in the kitchen of my son Josh and his wife Megan's house, standing with a cup of lukewarm coffee in my hands when she said it. Not a question, not a hint, not even a tone that left room for negotiation, just flat, unwavering certainty. We have no space for you. Get out. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed. The countertops, the gleaming white cabinets, the stainless steel appliances, they all seemed suddenly alien, hostile. I felt the sting of disbelief, a twisting in my chest I couldn't have anticipated. Shock settled over me like a cold fog, but I kept my hands steady around the mug. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I knew nothing I said could undo the moment. Josh hovered in the hallway, avoiding my gaze, pretending this was just another ordinary morning, while Megan's eyes flickered with the triumph of someone delivering a verdict they believed deserved. I didn't protest, didn't argue. I simply set the cup down, turned, and walked toward the guest suite upstairs, dragging my dignity along like a suitcase I wasn't ready to unpack yet. I closed the door behind me with a soft click, my mind already racing. There were memories, obligations, and quiet truths that hadn't been spoken. And somehow I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. After closing the door behind me, I sat on the edge of the narrow twin bed in the guest suite, letting the silence settle around me. The morning sun filtered through half-drawn blinds, painting pale stripes across the floor, and for a moment, I allowed myself to breathe. My thoughts drifted unbidden back to the months after James had died, the way the house had felt empty, the way grief had pressed on me like a weight I couldn't shift. Josh had just graduated from college then, ambitious, hopeful, with that mix of confidence and uncertainty that children carry. I remembered the day I handed him the check for $180,000, the full payout from James's life insurance. It's your future. I'd told him, not hesitating once. His eyes had shone with gratitude, and Megan, newly engaged and still bright-eyed, hugged me as if I were a Hallmark character come to life. "We'll never forget this, Linda," she'd whispered. "You'll always have a home with us." I had believed it. I had believed that love and sacrifice were understood, that they were returned in subtle gestures, in respect and acknowledgement. I had cleaned, cooked, offered guidance, folded towels and ironed shirts, always silently proud of the household I had held together, even when no one asked. And yet here I was, the same woman who had given everything without complaint, being told to leave her son's home as if the past generosity meant nothing. The contrast stung sharper than I expected. Memories of late-night talks, soccer games, hospital visits, all of it flooded me, and for the first time since James had passed, frustration mingled with the sadness. I realized generosity could be invisible, unappreciated, even dismissed. Still, I breathed, forcing calm over the ache, already thinking about the steps I would need to take next. The next few days brought a quiet shift in the house, one that crept into the corners like an unwelcome draft. Megan began to hover over every little task I attempted. She would sigh loudly whenever I asked to adjust the thermostat, muttering about schedules and family routines. The upstairs fridge now had a padlock ostensibly for meal prepping, though the message was clear: some spaces were no longer mine. Josh had started moving things, too small, imperceptible shifts at first. The Wi-Fi modem vanished from the living room and reappeared in the office upstairs. Netflix stopped working for hours on end, leaving me staring at the blank screen, while Megan's laughter echoed from another room. Even the dishes seemed marked territory, rearranged without my notice. I kept my calm, folding towels, wiping counters, and cooking quietly. But a subtle knot of unease twisted tighter with each day. One evening, I overheard Megan on the phone with a friend, her voice lilting with false cheer. "It's just temporary," she said. "But living with 2 kids and a grandma, it's intense." I stayed in the hall, heart tightening, letting the words sink in without reacting. Josh passed by offering a distracted nod, and I caught the hesitation in his eyes, a shadow of something unspoken. I began to notice patterns, small routines that were no longer mine. The guest suite door had become a boundary line, the cupboards upstairs off limits, and even the living room seemed subtly reorganized to remind me where I didn't belong. I cataloged each exclusion, silently storing it in memory rather than voicing frustration. Yet beneath the frustration, I kept my composure. I moved with care, observed with attention, and remembered the patience that had carried me through years of loss and hardship. Each small act of exclusion was a clue, and I began to see them forming a pattern, a deliberate push masked as daily life. Quietly, I decided to watch and wait to understand the full scope before I acted. The unease had settled into me like a second skin, and I was ready to see where this path would lead. I had risen early that morning, the house still hushed with pre-dawn quiet, and I was heading toward the kitchen for tea when I heard voices around the corner. Josh's tone was low, conspiratorial, and unmistakably tense. "She won't leave if we keep being nice," he said. "We've got to push her out without a fight." Megan's voice followed sharper than usual. "She won't sign her share over unless she feels unwanted. Make it uncomfortable. She'll leave herself." I froze the teacup halfway to my lips. The wallpaper behind her, the one I had helped choose 6 days ago, suddenly felt like a thin veil over the reality I hadn't fully seen. My son, my only son, was plotting to turn kindness into leverage to manipulate the woman who had given him everything into stepping aside for a nursery. A quiet anger settled over me, mingled with disbelief. For years I had provided, supported, and stood silently in the background. And now my generosity was being weaponized against me. But beneath the shock, a slow clarity emerged. I had underestimated nothing yet, and nothing about this plan accounted for one fact: I was not powerless. I had the deed. My name sat beside Josh's as a co-owner. Every payment, every loan, every attempt to claim the house without my knowledge was something I could control. The realization sparked a calm determination. I would not react in haste. I would not show panic. Instead, I would watch, catalog, and prepare. As I poured the boiling water over the tea bag, my hands steady. Despite the churn of emotion inside me, I began to map a strategy in my mind. Patience had carried me this far, and patience would now be my instrument. They had plotted, but they had not yet anticipated the full scope of the consequences. Quietly, I allowed myself a small, resolute smile. I woke before dawn, the house still heavy with the hush of early morning. I moved quietly, folding towels from the laundry, straightening the small stack of papers on the counter, as if preparing the space for someone else's arrival. Nothing about this morning needed drama. Megan and Josh were still asleep, oblivious to the fact that their plan to push me out had already been noticed and cataloged. I opened my suitcase slowly, placing a few essential items inside clothes, my late husband James's framed photograph, a well-worn paperback I had never finished. At the bottom, carefully wrapped in a thin cloth, was the folder no one knew existed. The house deed, my name printed beside Josh's as co-owner. I slipped it back down, letting it remain invisible, a silent instrument of power I would reveal only when necessary. Breakfast would be simple, and no words would be exchanged. I poured a cup of coffee, left it on the kitchen counter, and quietly checked every room one last time. Everything looked as it always had, yet nothing was as it seemed. The house belonged to both of us, and they had no idea. I walked to the door, suitcase in hand, and left without turning back. The driveway was empty, the early morning light soft on the asphalt. I ordered a cab and slid into the back seat, the city slowly waking around me. Charlotte's streets were familiar, but distant. The rhythm of the neighborhood now just background to my own carefully constructed plan. The motel I had reserved a week earlier was small, unremarkable, but private, perfect for thinking, planning, and waiting. As I settled into the room, I placed the folder on the bedside table, my fingers lingering on it for a moment. Calmness settled over me, but it was not resignation. Every detail had been accounted for, every possible move anticipated. For the first time in days, a subtle thrill coursed through me, the quiet knowledge that control, patience, and observation could be more powerful than any argument or confrontation. The motel room was quiet, save for the hum of the old air conditioner and the occasional car passing outside. I spread the papers across the small desk, the house deed, past mortgage statements, and the notes I had taken over the last few days. Each line, each number, each signature told a story of ownership, of responsibility, and of opportunity. I called the local lender, Carolina Private Lending, and asked to verify the property status. A polite man named Brad confirmed what I had feared and anticipated. Josh had taken out a $95,000 business loan using the house as collateral, and payments had been missed for months. 3 warnings had already gone unheeded. He was in default. I kept my voice calm, careful, precise, as though I were arranging tea, rather than uncovering a trap laid by my own son. Sitting back, I allowed the weight of the information to settle. This was not a game. It was a matter of law, and my patience would be the instrument of justice. I drafted a plan, 5 copies of the deed, a request for legal counsel should Josh attempt to argue, and a timeline for foreclosure if the loan continued in default. Every step had to be deliberate, every action defensible. No emotion, no overreaction. My mind drifted to the years I had spent supporting them, folding laundry, cooking meals, attending parent-teacher conferences, writing checks I never questioned. That generosity, once unquestioned, had become the canvas for their manipulation. Yet I refused to let frustration dictate my moves. Quiet strategy, patience, and observation would serve me better than confrontation ever could. I reviewed the loan documents again, noting the missed payments and the terms that made their position precarious. Each oversight, each misstep was now part of a larger pattern I could use to assert control without compromise. The thrill of calculated strategy settled in, not in cruelty, but in clarity. For the first time since moving in, I felt the measure of power that came from knowledge, from preparation, from understanding the unseen leverage that would ensure the balance tipped in my favor. Sipping lukewarm coffee, I allowed myself a small secret smile. Everything they had counted on, their certainty, their control, was about to meet the reality they had not anticipated. The calm before the storm was mine, and I would wield it carefully. By the time the notices arrived at 124 Grayson Park Drive, Josh and Megan had no idea what was coming. I had stayed quiet, letting the house hum with the false sense of security they had carefully built. The envelope slid through the mail slot, bright orange with the lender's stamp, a simple piece of paper that carried the weight of months of miscalculations and negligence. Megan was the first to notice. She called me that afternoon in a panic, her voice trembling despite her attempts at calm. "Linda, what is happening? There's a letter from the bank. Did you—" Josh grabbed the phone, muttering. It must be a mistake, but I let the line go dead before offering any explanation. Their panic was exquisite in its quiet desperation, a stark contrast to the casual, almost bored dismissiveness they had shown toward me for weeks. Neighbors began to notice the flurry of activity as movers arrived to survey the property, and local gossip quietly spread. Megan posted an urgent plea on the neighborhood Facebook group framing it as a scam, though her words rang hollow to those who knew her. Comments poured in, some confused, some sympathetic, but all underscored the sudden collapse of control she had assumed was hers. Josh posted an old childhood photo of us together, painting himself as the victim, and yet even that failed to quell the tide of scrutiny that had begun to roll over them. I watched quietly from my motel room, a cup of lukewarm coffee in hand, noting each reaction, each misstep, each futile attempt to reclaim authority. Every frantic text, every half-hearted apology only confirmed what I had long known. Patience and careful planning had granted me a power they had never anticipated. I felt a surge of satisfaction, not malicious, not vengeful, but deeply justified. In the days that followed, I observed the slow unraveling of their carefully constructed lives, phone calls from creditors, questions from friends, and the subtle humiliation of public exposure. Megan's carefully curated social media posts meant to elicit sympathy were dissected and questioned by dozens of strangers. I stayed composed, letting the consequences unfold exactly as I had anticipated, every move methodical and deliberate. The thrill of the payoff was in the silence, the unspoken understanding that control had shifted. No shouting, no confrontation, no anger, only the quiet assertion of what was rightfully mine. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to breathe fully, to sit back and watch as justice measured and patient unfolded in a way that words could never have forced. Their shock and discomfort were complete, and I knew without a doubt that I had regained the balance of power. The messages started arriving quietly at first, a mix of texts, emails, and social media notes. Josh's voice, usually brash and confident, softened in digital form. "Mom, can we talk? I know I messed up. Please." Megan's posts were tentative, carefully crafted to show remorse, but there was still an edge of performance in every word. I read them one by one, sitting on the edge of the motel bed, my fingers tracing the worn edges of the folder containing the house deed. For years I had given without hesitation time, money, love, and guidance, and yet the silence I had endured was now mirrored back at me through their apologies and pleas. I let the messages sit unread for a long while, feeling the weight of each one testing my own resolve. When I finally responded, it was measured. I acknowledged their concern, but I did not offer the bridge they sought. I made it clear that while I cared, the respect I had earned over decades could not be bargained away. My boundaries were firm, and I would not compromise my autonomy for the comfort of others. Sitting in the quiet of the motel room, I reflected on the lessons this ordeal had carved into me. Respect is earned, not assumed. Love does not obligate subservience. Generosity is powerful, but it must be paired with self-worth to have meaning. I realized that my patience and restraint had been tested not to break me, but to teach me where my true limits and strengths lay. I poured myself a cup of tea and held it between my hands, the steam warming my face. In that stillness, I recognized the subtle empowerment that had come from knowing when to act and when to wait. Forgiveness, I realized, was not about erasing the past, but about reclaiming my present without surrendering the dignity I had fought so hard to preserve. For the first time since being asked to leave, I felt a quiet clarity settle over me, a calm assurance that my life, my choices, and my worth were firmly in my own hands, and that was enough. The condo smelled faintly of fresh paint and new beginnings. Sunlight spilled across the laminate floors, soft and golden, and for the first time in weeks, I felt an ease settle over my shoulders that had nothing to do with someone else's approval. I carried my small suitcase inside, along with James's framed photograph and the red folder I had kept close throughout the upheaval. This space was mine, not borrowed, not tolerated, but fully and completely mine. I spent the morning unpacking, slowly placing each item deliberately. A small plant from a roadside market found a home by the window, its green leaves brushing against the light. I brewed a pot of coffee in the ancient kettle the unit came, with letting the aroma fill the room as I settled onto the little balcony and listened to the distant hum of waves. The ocean wasn't visible, but the rhythm was enough a quiet soundtrack to a life reclaimed. Days passed with a gentle rhythm. I joined a local art class, where Walter, the 70-year-old instructor with suspenders and terrible jokes, welcomed me by name on the second day. I painted like someone who had survived storms, both literal and emotional, each brushstroke an assertion of self. Neighbors nodded in passing, and for the first time I felt seen without needing to explain, justify, or defend. Evenings were spent with books, cups of tea, and the quiet comfort of knowing I could choose how to spend my hours. The tension that had clung to me for months slowly ebbed, replaced by autonomy. The satisfaction of making decisions purely for myself. I reflected on the journey, the patience, the careful strategy, the calm assertion of boundaries, and realized that empowerment did not require anger or revenge. It required presence, clarity, and the courage to hold one's own space. I stepped onto the balcony one evening, the wind carrying the faint scent of salt and pine. I closed my eyes and let the sound of the distant waves fill me, feeling the weight of the past lift, replaced by the gentle certainty of freedom. This life was mine, and for the first time, I could breathe fully without looking over my shoulder.